Welcome to Distilled Security Podcast, Episode 3. My name's Justin. I'm here with Rick and Joe, and we're glad to have you here. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps with our viewership and distributing this around here. I think we have a pretty good episode lined up here. We got a number of really good topics. A lot of things has happened over the last month, a couple of things. And I think we're going to get into pretty good conversations here.
I think so.
Yeah. So to start off with, I mean, it was a little thing that happened a couple weeks ago, but CrowdStrike with this. So if the audience isn't aware, there was a security vendor, monitoring detection and response. They pushed something out, and it was bad. Brought down mainly Windows systems, all Windows systems into that, and a lot of damage. I think you had some stats onto that. Like how many billions of dollars was estimated to be lost into that?
It was huge, and the first thing I think we needed to do is correct it. CrowdStrike is what I understand.
Oh, struck.
Past tense is the
at this point.
Yeah. I always have to correct my kids on their tense. So yeah.
No, some big stats. Just $5.4 billion in direct financial loss is one of the quotes. Another one is Delta. Just today, I believe, was announcing that they were going for damages from both CrowdStrike and Microsoft in the area of $500 million.
Why Microsoft?
They looped them into it because it was a Microsoft they were running.
It was like the deployment mechanism.
They're pulling it together for both.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know how they would have fault into that, but I guess they throw it in the courts and be like, yeah, whatever sticks,
Absolutely. Right. Yeah, they brought in somebody supposedly a heavy hitter for the kind of attorney that goes after this. And so you look at all the deep pockets. That's my guess.
Easier to settle than...
And I wonder if it could eventually turn into a class action, with something along this line.
I don't know. That's interesting.
I was wondering if... I haven't seen anything on this, but maybe you guys have. If anyone... I don't know of anyone that has tried to invoke their business interruption insurance or anything like that either, because that's a big number, 5.6 billion or whatever it was. I don't know if a company was truly down for days or whatever, if you're retail or something like that, I could see trying to be like, well, it's not exactly an act of God, right?
And maybe more of it. I've seen that floating around. I don't know too many companies that hold that.
Business interruption?
Yeah.
It's usually part, in my experience, it's usually part of a package. So if it's sort of like, oh, I need these 3 things, and if you buy, it's like the Comcast. If you buy the bundle, right, you get this discount.
The premium,
it's just a little more,
platinum bundle, this is also thrown into it.
It's part of my company's insurance plan for a degree. You have interruption. You can't fulfill certain services because of something that happened. That's a claim.
Right.
It has to be and I've seen some of the policy, it has to be over an hour and some other stuff.
Mine's even much longer than that.
Okay, gotcha.
But I would be interested to see if there were if underwriters or actuaries or whatever had data on the claims that were filed based on some of that stuff. That'd be interesting because to a large extent, it's
this would be a claim. I don't see how you can it was a vendor.
If you choose to invoke it, right? Because there's a whole bunch of pain in terms of getting paid out potentially.
Gotcha. There's going to be lots of case studies on this. We should revisit this in 2 months, see what's unfolding from that. Plus, if there's lawsuits that are already happening.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things about the lawsuit is that it's the first one where somebody officially came out and estimated the $500 million in damage. So that was kind of new for today. And Delta's got some good things to complain about. 7,000 flights canceled.
Yeah.
They're going to have to do 176,000 refunds and reimbursement requests. They got the process. So, yeah, that's not little.
Yeah, but I rarely see software vendors, no matter who they are, say, "Oh yes, we're taking responsibility for how you implement it or the systems you implement it on." Right. Yeah. So, okay, well, not our fault. You put it on these business critical systems, right? So, I don't know. I don't know if...
but that's our whole stick, is put it on the business critical systems, type of thing.
It is, but I can definitely see arguments on both sides of the case where it's okay, well, you didn't have appropriate business continuity, right? This was clearly a single point of failure for you. Yeah, we had an error in our software, but it caused you a bunch of heartache. Well, some of that's on you. You have these business processes. Like, I'm not saying right, wrong, or indifferent. I could see that
I
argument.
mean, they can't make that message publicly. Like, you're an idiot for running our software. Come on.
Wow. No, but not you're an idiot for running the software.
I know. But
what do you have set up in the background? And I think a lot of times, there's the court of public opinion, and then there's the courts of getting sued.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes different arguments are made in different arenas.
The crux of it is it's going to happen. It's happened with a whole bunch of breach stuff as well. Like, it's going to last for years.
Yeah.
And then they're going to arrive at a settlement. That's going to be a fraction of what they entered into.
I heard that today as somebody else made a comment that what Delta is doing will never make its way all the way through. It will end up in a settlement, and that's how they expected.
And the only people that win are the lawyers at the end of the day.
We should have a whole other segment at some point about cyber insurance and stuff like that, because I have some strong opinions. But yeah.
Well, something else that jumped to mind was one of the articles I read shows a factor of, I can't remember if it was 23 billion in amount of value that CrowdStrike dropped.
Oh.
Based on this, because their stock's way down.
Is that sustained? I haven't looked at it for a while.
It's
still way down?
Yeah.
As
of the Wall Street Journal
recover,
article.
especially within a year, in most companies. I saw the day that happened, people were like, discount on CrowdStrike stock, type of thing. Like, a lot of people look for that now.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And if you want to see some interesting back and forth, the SentinelOne CEO, Tomer Weingarten, had been interviewed, and I don't have all the facts memorized, but a lot of calling CrowdStrike out for just doing things incorrectly. And then the integrity of the article had a link to a rebuttal by CrowdStrike. So the gist of it was, you should never be doing this kind of work in the kernel. You should doing it in user mode. You should be not really getting to that level. The way it's architected, and it's really not a force majeure or an act of God kind of problem. It was a bad architecture. He is claiming that just CrowdStrike had a bad architecture. Now, of course, he has a competing product.
Right.
And the whole reason he was doing it is because he wants to, bring up some positives on what he's doing.
Right.
Well, it was good. It was very compelling, but then I had to read the rebuttal. And the rebuttal was also very compelling. And
I would think you'd have to be in the kernel to prevent some of the malware that's out there and everything.
No,
but
they're saying that SentinelOne doesn't do that, and they can still prevent it. However, in the rebuttal, CrowdStrike says that they're able to do it 11 times faster because of where they're operating. And they're following the Microsoft rules.
That's what I was going to say, too. They also said, and we did actually follow the process for doing, like, the defined process for doing the thing that we're
SentinelOne said they weren't.
Right.
But then they responded and said, we're following each one of those items. So,
definitely
we can
some
believe
drama there.
Yeah.
it'll get flushed out and everything. So, but an interesting thing why I wanted to kind of bring this up is, do we plan for alternate vendors in this type of thing? Like, do we have backups, or do we have like continuity to say like we have two MDR vendors, and one goes on one goes on another? Like, how far do you take this?
Well, that's what the SentinelOne CEO was actually saying. He's saying, hey, if you were on the fence, feel free to introduce our product in for a segment. That way you're not running everything in the same way, is the gist of where he was going.
Feel like we're back in the like late 90s, because wasn't that a thing, like you need to use two separate like firewall vendors in case one had like a
but those were more in serial, and they're saying run half in this network, one half on this tool, and that seems like it would be a maintenance nightmare.
It does seem like, I mean, in a way, I'm going to bring up PCI again, but in a way, like, I mean, there's all the process, like, hey, you have to have like the old knuckle busters and stuff like that, right? Because if the tech goes down, you still need a secure way to do the things.
Yeah.
So it actually puts me in the mind of that kind of stuff, where it's like, look, no matter what technology you use, there are going to be like unknown failure points. And a big part of business continuity is like, hey, if this piece of technology or this tool that we use isn't available anymore, can we still do the hypercritical stuff?
So what's the difference from of this issue and being ransomware but recovering quickly? same outage scenario, you still are unable to use your tools, and you still, from a continuity perspective, need to have manual processes, which I really liked where you're going with
That's
that.
true. I think some of the thought process might say though that if you're ransomware and you have like good immutable backups or whatever, not that everything's just like a push button restore, you can do that. Part of the real pain with this one was you're in this blue screen loop, and if you have like BitLocker on an older OS, you have to literally manually touch the machine to solve the issue, which is a huge pain.
I had a client that got hit with this, and they're a convenience store type thing. So locations sprung out, the United
everywhere.
States, and they had to drive to every single convenience store location.
Yeah.
It was.
How are they back?
Yeah, they got back. It basically took them just about a week.
A week.
Yeah.
I have a buddy.
But it was all hands on deck, type of thing. Like,
he runs infrastructure at a big organization, 15,000 endpoints affected, but a lot of them were remote workers, right? So then it just introduces this whole thing like, well, if someone lives, all right, 30 miles, okay, 50 miles, 200 miles from the office.
so what they do, just ship?
Yeah, they ship your thing back. We'll ship you the thing, and in their case, they had.
But that's days.
They had exactly. That's an endpoint backup.
Pocket.
So everyone local did the local thing,
Yeah.
and everyone that wasn't local, they shipped the thing. But to your point, it took them about a week, and again, same thing, like all hands on deck and pause everything else and all that stuff. So, yeah. But to your point, Joe. I think some people would make the argument, or could make the argument, it's like, well, with a ransomware thing, there are certain patterns that don't require the same level of manual distributed intervention to solve. But it is, I think conceptually, there are similar different solves, which is like, look, what's the business process? What are the critical elements of the business process? And can you do it without tools, or is it so baked into the tools that you have to use, like Delta flights, I would suspect, there's not a lot of that level of logistics you can do without machines to do it. So in that case, I don't know if it's like one for every 30 gates at an airport or whatever, but maybe you do have a separate thing, and all of a sudden you can at least like get some things through or whatever.
Yeah, I just don't see how that would be practical in the kind of place like an airline, unless you're Southwest and running, what's the claim?
Windows 3.1.
Yeah. There are a lot of good memes on that.
Yeah, I saw something funny on that. But bifurcating the two ideas, the one that you're talking about is, the all hands on deck and recovery and those kinds of things. And then the other thing that we're talking about is, well, what do you do to keep your customers moving with the knuckle busters or things like that?
Or backup technology. It's not that different than like a worm site from a DR perspective. It's just endpoint world if you're talking about some of these systems. But it's not like a bunch of servers weren't impacted too.
Right.
And
if I was running a backup site, I'd probably want to have the same EDR protection on it as I had everything else, and it would have just been hit too.
Well, and then it gets infinitely complex, right? Because how many elements of security software or any kind of software are on these endpoints? And so how do you do you have a separate endpoint that runs literally an entirely different stack? In case any one of the ones goes down, you can back up to, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
right?
and that there's some truth to that, but I think that this is a unique case where you don't have too many security software embedded into the kernel, type of thing. Like if you have log monitoring, that's not at a kernel level. That's some agent shifting off logs to another point. If it crashes, it just crashes.
It's fair.
Type of thing.
I think that's a good point, but this is also one of those situations where it's like, well, no one expected this type of blue screen loop to happen, even though it's embedded in the kernel, and therefore I wonder what else. It's that unknown unknowns.
Well, and it gets into so MDR. We're talking about MDR with CrowdStrike, but what about some type of password management, like Thycotic or they call it Delinea now, or CyberArk.
Absolutely.
Everybody's embedding those password management into that. And that's a point of failure, even though they have guidelines here's how to back up and here's how to maintain this and everything. They push out a bad update that it could be hours, days, to recover and get access.
And it also makes me think hospital stuff, right? Because again, they have to have alternate manual procedures for quite a bit of things, right? When you get into the nitty-gritty of it, and they have separate continuity plans and all that stuff. But it's a huge pain, and it's notorious for having things segmented in ways that security people don't like, right? Because you can't upload all the patches. You can't do all like the things that are typically rote good security, right? Or like, oh yeah, don't let anyone know the password for this service account and rotate it automatically. All right, well if that, you snap your fingers and that's gone now, you go, oh wait, what do we do?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and like LastPass, for example, how many people just be able to go to a LastPass or another one of the browser integrated systems? Was one of the ones you mentioned one of the browser integrated systems that your end users might use?
Well, I mean, they have those type of where you can retrieve the password portals and everything. So Delinea used to be Thycotic, type of thing. It's really that, or CyberArk is the more expensive one and everything.
And those are more like the system administrator level.
Yeah, but they have where you can go in and get passwords out of that type of thing.
Yeah.
But then you got the traditional LastPass or 1Password or something like that, where it's just a storage of passwords.
And you've had that blended into all of your teams,
Right.
and all of your employees now are getting that level of protection, but there's an outage that makes it impossible to get to that. It's just another supply chain single point of failure.
Yeah. I'll tell you now, like just talking about this, like I have a high reliance on 1Password. Like if they go down, I don't know any of my passwords anymore. They're all auto-generated and unique to every single site. Like I'd be screwed if their service went down.
And to that point, like you're talking about, oh, well, what do you do? Run alternate technologies? Well, completely infeasible for like a password or a secrets vault, right?
Or
Like
I have to dump the entire database to a local like storage every now and then. I guess would be a feasible thing, maybe.
Well, it depends on what the issue is. Is it inaccessible or is it like corrupt?
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah, and in either case, you don't have access to it, so it doesn't matter if it's corrupt or inaccessible. You just have your own disruption. So exactly from what you're saying. So then what happens? You get
could reset
people
the password, but
who you could, but you get people who will then want to export it. And where do they export it to? And they paste it into a OneNote sitting on a unsecure part of their laptop.
Absolutely right.
That's only protected by whatever hardware encryption they're using.
Right.
If at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the other consideration, which I'd be interested if there is ever any analysis on this or ever will be, but like we talked about like the direct damages and all that stuff from this. I wonder how much shadow IT occurred in response to these things not working, right? A bunch of people just want to do their jobs. Their work machine is no longer able to do their job. So, okay, well, I still got to do my job. I guess I'll just do it over my phone that I've been told, or get my home PC, like all these things. Like, I know I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm also completely dead right now.
Right.
So
I'm going to use my
do
kid's
something.
gaming PC that has who knows what's infected with.
So I mean, we're getting into like third or fourth order conjecture, but I do wonder.
That's real dedication from an employee.
Wow. Yeah. I think it happens, but it depends on how much stress there are and like what it happens.
But like, no, this is a mandatory vacation. All right, I'm taking it.
Yeah.
But I do wonder how many like insecure modes of operation were implemented in response to the formal channels being out, and if that'll have second or third order repercussions because now certain data might be available on someone's home PC, or certain things there might be paths inward that were not there before.
And how many GRC teams were actually invoked in order to go through and create an actual exception process to the policy that was violated when that
We're
happened.
all off.
So that
No, we're all going to like going to sites and resetting machines.
right, yeah, nobody was getting
Right.
I'd
Yeah, it's not.
email Justin and let us know.
Yeah, right.
How many people who are watching this actually knows of any enterprise who has a record of doing an exception process to their policy for using alternate things before it happened.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
how many Black Swan events do we need before they're no longer Black Swan events?
It's just
They're just gray swans,
Yeah.
just birds. They're all just birds.
So, well, SolarWinds jumps to mind too, right? And
Okay,
so
yep,
that is
absolutely.
another issue that was different, didn't cause that kind of outage, but it allowed everybody to get, allowed the bad guys to get access to any place that got pushed the update.
Right.
This is like what, going on 2 years now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now it puts me in the mind of like the CIA triad, right? So it's like, okay, well, we had like the confidentiality one with SolarWinds. We had like I guess I would consider it. I mean, it is an availability. Like, okay, well, when's the integrity one going to hit? What's that going to look like?
What's the integrity one? What's that look like to you?
It's some crazy widespread database. It's corruption of all the password databases.
Yeah, or something
widespread.
Like
some encryption
but
key that
can't
gets
you argue
support.
that's blended with availability? I mean,
It is. I mean, it's tough to piece them apart.
But here's the one I'm worried about: is the one that goes through and slightly modifies
Right.
all of the doctor's orders, so all the medication for all the people in the hospital is slightly different than what it said, and nobody knows the check and nobody validates it. Or
I transpose 2 digits in every field across this whole database or whatever.
and every one of those is in your bank account. In your bank account, my
when you
bank
get into
account.
finance, integrity has a whole different meaning.
Right.
Start pulling that apart. Oof.
I mean, you talk about zero defects. I had a CIO who was huge on zero defect, Chris Kowalski, and we talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
And his point was, do you ever want to pull up your bank statement and find it to be wrong?
Depends if it's wrong up.
That's Monopoly. Back there in your favor.
That's never been my...
$5 million. All right.
Yeah, I've never had that one happen.
Yeah. But then you don't say anything and you do not pass go and you go directly to jail.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
But anyway, I think it's interesting because you're absolutely right. Major events, vendor driven, confidentiality, integrity, or confidentiality, availability. Are we thinking about what's the integrity one? What could it look like? Where are the weak points? Where are the single points of failure?
yeah. So here's why that may not be something that somebody goes after, because how do you, as a bad guy, monetize the integrity one? That's going to be a little bit harder because you've changed the data, but you don't really tell anybody.
I just keep thinking of Office Space.
Right.
You just take a penny from any transaction.
Fraud would probably be into that. I don't know if that's kind of concealment of actual source, into there.
Well, and errors and attacks are different, right? So
Yeah.
I think the major vendor issues we're talking about were more, I mean, you could envision something that's predicated by an attack somehow and causes one of these things, but
And honestly, the CIA triad's been broken for years since this introduced it. So
it's fair.
not full encompassing.
No,
is
of
basic,
course,
type of thing, so.
But it does make me think what would, in terms of the what could go wrong. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, if I I can't see it, I can see it, but it's just not right. And how do you? And honestly, that's one of the scariest things from a data perspective, because then oh God, how do you untangle that? Do you have the backups? Do you have the?
Oh yeah, availability and confidentiality are both side effects or the results of ransomware.
Yeah.
And then this one was availability. Hopefully there was no data corruption or data leakage through CrowdStrike's item. But yeah, you're right. I haven't seen the big integrity one hit yet though.
No. And I do wonder what the second or third order impacts will be in terms of oh, you did this thing on your phone? You really shouldn't have done this thing on your phone. Your kid using your
something
phone?
wrong, type of thing.
Yeah.
I had something, I won't say which company I was working with, but we had something right before we were doing a ROC. We implemented a new encryption solution months past for our core database and everything. And we were having this issue, didn't think it was anything related, but we were having data integrity issues. Random things would just get corrupted and they'd have to do a full, restore and everything. Finally, after troubleshooting, found out it was an encryption solution that we had over the it was MySQL database and everything. And of course, we're weeks away from getting our ROC, and I made the hard choice. It was actually came down to me is compliance more important or data integrity? I'm data integrity. All right, let's remove it. Type of thing. And we were non-compliant, and we had to scramble to find a new solution.
Right.
Before we could certify that. And actually, we worked together. It was a month and a half, delay from that. So about a month, from our PCI that were delayed. But when you come down to it, it's integrity is more important.
Right. Security supports the business. That's
piece
how
of
that
paper,
works, man.
Type of thing. And we even considered leaving it on until after the QSA, but it was causing so much issues, with our production. It was it's not
Can't
worth
do
it.
it.
Yeah, it's not worth it.
No, I love that. And I always say compliance is a side effect of just doing good security. And what you did there was good security. You managed the organization effectively working for the purpose of the organization. And I don't know if you had a compensating control of any way or if you had a
we already
level
had
of risk.
many layers, into this and everything.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
so lots of compensating controls. acceptable levels of risk.
Yeah.
Did you properly go get an exception signed off by leadership that you're going to skip that control for a time period?
No.
Shame on you.
Yeah.
It was earlier in his career.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of
good,
tying this all up is, well, what happened? We just had
Plausible
another.
deniability,
Oh,
Joe.
yeah. No, we'll go with that. Now tying it all up. CrowdStrike, just another one of your supply chain risk management items you have to worry about, and it introduced a new black swan event type thing that you haven't thought about, but is there. And so, what do we do?
Yeah. You know how we have like 100-year events, like, it's a 100-year flood or a 100-year fire?
I wonder every like 2 or 3 years.
Well, it's true. But I wonder if we're going to get to a point where you're like, oh yeah, this is the 50-year outage. Like, this happens roughly once every 50 years, like across a major vendor.
We should come up. Is there a Moore's law that goes with this? Gets shorter time frame, so the 100-year
as things
event
get more complex and faster. I'm sure.
But
it have
honestly, like the slammer warrant, I think hit harder, type of thing. Like, and some of that, like historical stuff, I say historical, like 15, 20 years, But like, I think that was longer outages than what a lot of businesses had, like most recovered within a week, or a week basis, type of thing. Like,
financially, though, different impact.
Financially, it's
tech was
different.
integrated in a totally different way now, right?
Much
And the
right,
speed to, like, reliance on and expectation and speed to transaction is like so totally different.
And to CrowdStrike, I mean, I'm eager to see like all the faults that were into that, but to their credit, they quickly pushed out a new patch within hours, type of thing.
Yeah.
And they pushed out as much help as they could.
That's right. The bad thing had
type of
happened
Yeah.
already, and you can't, like, they can't go and touch every end user's PC,
Right.
but like everything that they could fix remotely, I mean, they did respond fairly quickly.
Yeah. So that's, credit where credit's due,
Yeah.
into that. But
Yeah.
I was just thinking like, we've had a lot worse issues and stuff out there that lasted way longer, with that. I mean, ransomware is just something like, it's not as widespread as in happening all at the same time, to businesses, but it's way more impactful than this thing is, Even if you had all the backups, it takes a while to restore everything,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, interesting.
Yeah, it's I like that conversation. It went places I didn't expect.
Yeah, I think we beat this up pretty good.
Yeah, I think so. Should we move on to this deliciousness that Joe has brought?
It is good.
It's malty.
What do you got there?
We got Rabbit Hole. It is Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey, 4-grain triple malt, which a lot of us, we had to look up what malt was.
Spent way too much time talking about
We
malt.
had a idea what it was, but we're like, what is it exactly?
I was very incorrect.
Yeah. So malting is essentially taking a grain, soaking it in water to allow it to essentially open up so the fermented sugars are more available, and then essentially drying it in hot air to basically, it doesn't toast it, but it kind of like toasts it a little bit and gets ready for it to basically put it into the mash and eat up all those sugars and everything. So, and the interesting thing was it, Joe, you pointed out that the ingredients, there's a honey barley.
So here's the
into
ingredients: 70% corn, 10% malted wheat, 10% malted barley, and 10% honey malted barley.
And so the triple malt is one wheat, 3 barley.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting. I expected,
I thought
as you
rye.
mentioned, rye. Typically with the 4 grains, it's, with that wheat, rye, barley, and corn, obviously, into that. So this, they take a little bit different slant, into
It is super smooth, though.
It is very
when I
smooth.
think about the bite that some ryes have, this does not have any of that.
Yeah, it's a good balance, I think, with it. So, yeah, it's not, I don't get anything, like it has that sweetness, obviously, from the corn and everything, but it has a good balance with the other grains. A lot of it, you'll get like really bitter or really, a bite, into that, or that spice from the rye if they put a lot of spice forward, into it. This is very well balanced with it.
Well, I tasted it before I put a chip of ice in it, and then afterwards, and I enjoy it much more now this
Yeah.
way. So, when
thanks
we're
for
done, we'll
tuning
need
in,
to we'll need to try it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, hey, cheers.
Cheers.
guys.
So, anybody from Rabbit Hole, if you're listening,
We're looking
You can
for
send us,
sponsors.
you can send us another bottle, and we'll feature it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, little thing happened called B-Sides.
B-Sides Pittsburgh.
We actually promoted it a couple of times on both of the other episodes. We mentioned it for each of those. Joe, why don't you take this since you're both part of the organizer, but you're the main honcho
the main
here.
event.
I've been doing this since 2011.
Yeah.
It all started with a group of folks who went out to the 2010 one in Vegas and came back and said we could do this again. And kind of the first one we did was 80 people showed up. We had 8 talks, raised $12,000, and all you needed was a speaker and some people to listen to them speak. Get some booze and some food, and you got a Pittsburgh Security
Now you got a
Conference.
conference.
Yeah. And so this one, in contrast,
You're
is
like, that's
really
a good combination.
that was a good combination. I mean, it's Pittsburgh. You can't just.
right.
You want to get your friends together. You're going to need food and booze, right?
Yeah.
So
What's the first one up at left field?
it was left field meeting
Okay.
space next
Yeah.
to PNC Park.
And you wheeled in the kegs there. And
Tap the kegs around noon. Yep. And this one. So this event we had probably the best reviews of ever.
Yeah.
I would say this is the best one. There were almost no complaints, and the complaints were actually just good constructive criticism,
Right.
which is unlike any other year.
Yeah, ideas for improvement.
Yeah, just
what
good
was
stuff.
The one was like the booths were on each side of that hallway, which
Yeah, a
made it
little bit of
tight.
New space.
we needed more flow for the traffic to get
Okay.
through, the people
Yeah.
to walk through, and we're already coming up with ideas for that.
Which, to be fair, this was a brand, like they redid everything in the casino.
They
So
they redid a lot of stuff, and
And
we
we
had
were
a little
like the
bit new
first or second
placement.
event there.
Yeah, in
Yeah.
this new space. So
it's still getting familiar with like what you can do and what's right, and all that. So yeah.
So quick stats: we had 1,004 tickets sold, had about 800 attendees show up.
Biggest ever. Beat pre-COVID numbers.
Yeah.
Nice.
We had just under that right before COVID, and we're striving to hit the 1,000 mark. Maybe next year we'll hit the 1,000 actually attending.
Yeah.
That'll be the goal.
And sooner, hopefully.
Sooner.
What?
We'll hit the mark sooner.
Oh right, yeah. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
So we had over 20 sponsors and raised. All this is public. We'll share it. So raised over $100,000 to make this thing happen. So talk about throwing a party for your 1,000 Pittsburgh closest friends with about 20 different sponsors talking about their wares. We had 2 tracks of talks, so about 14 talks all day long. We had a Capture the Flag, a Lockpick Village, a Speed Mentoring, and this year we had a new ham radio village, which next year I think the organizing team for that part of it wants to call it the Wireless Village. They were talking about all things all day. In fact, in that room, I heard some of the folks, and they did a great job. I heard them talking about, it was almost as if they were giving hourly presentations all day long on various things, from how wireless works, how ham radio works, to even car hacking. So, if you didn't get a chance to check that out, you definitely got to get there next time. The talks are just about ready to be published. So everything that was recorded that we had permission to record will show up on the Pittsburgh, B-Sides Pittsburgh website. And if you're not already on it, you should go to pitsec.com, PITTSEC.com, and subscribe, and that'll allow you to become part of the Pittsburgh Slack channel for the cybersecurity community. So you can.
You're talking about the B-Sides Pittsburgh Slack channel.
It is a Slack channel that has a channel for B-Sides, but it also has a place for, like, if you just wanted to throw a conference and you wanted to get a channel and just promote it and talk about it and get a conversation going, you could just request one.
The Pittsburgh security community
yeah,
place. I know you know.
I'm in it. Yeah. Exactly.
But it's more than just B-Sides.
It is probably one of the best hidden gems in the Pittsburgh security community. It is phenomenal. Like the collaboration that's on there.
Engagement,
I mean, just hitting it up, type of thing. John tells me, like, because it's an open Slack and
kudos to John Ziola for
Yeah.
putting it together a few years ago.
Exactly. But he says, like, some people do a little bit too private at that. Keep in mind, it is like, the admins can see some of the stuff, type of thing. Yeah, don't worry about that, type of thing. But, like, for the stuff you really don't care about or don't care about John, seeing, type of thing, it's great. Like, I've reached out to so many contacts around Pittsburgh, to see them on Slack and be like, hey, I got a quick question for you, type of thing. Or there's 3 or 4 of us that jump into it. It's like, it is phenomenal,
Well, and just on the talks really quickly, I also wanted to add more talks submitted, significantly more than ever before.
80. So I almost feel like I need to apologize to people who had a great talk submitted that didn't get it in, because there were over 80 talks submitted, and we only had room for 2 tracks.
Yeah.
An hour-long talk all day, you really only got like 14 to 16 slots for it. We tried to avoid talks over lunch just because we didn't want people to have their talk scheduled and not have people show up for it. So here's what we're planning
Especially
for
when
next
there's
year.
like a time for lunch and then they put away the food.
Oh, yeah.
type of
Yeah,
thing.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
a couple cool things from this year. One of the things that we did was lots of drink tickets were out there. Thank you to sponsors who sponsored this and also bought extra drink tickets. We said to the casino, what is the earliest legal possible time you can open the bars? 9 o'clock. Done.
Yeah.
And we got that open, which
that's
actually
hilarious.
beat our first B-sides, where I don't think I'd let them tap the kegs until at least 11:30. So that was fun.
reminds me of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia when they're riding on the plane. They're like, what's the most beers I can order right now? And she's like, nobody has ever asked that question. He's like, great, so there's no policy. All right.
I love it. So for next year, and I have the contract on my desk, and I'm really hoping the casino holds the date for us. But right now, hold the date. I believe it's July 11th. It's a Friday.
Okay.
We've always done these on Fridays. And right now, we're looking to get the
casino, right?
the casino.
Yeah.
Right now, we're looking to get the entire casino. So the difference between last year is you'd come up the escalator and you could go to the old conference space, or you could walk all the way down to the new ballroom conference space. And then there was a buffet. What they did was they converted that buffet into nice conference space, and was I impressed with how nice it looked.
I love how the windows were like on the back of the speaker
That room
and everything.
gorgeous. That's
overlooking the city.
They did a great job.
So there's that. So we had those 2 spaces, and some things we already have ideas what we can do to anybody who was caught up in too much traffic walking through the hallways. We're working on that. But the other thing we're working on is getting all 3 spaces for next year.
So it'll be 3 tracks?
3 tracks.
Okay.
We'll be able to get another 7 or 8 speakers, maybe do some, play around with it. Maybe get the capture the flag back to the cool room it used to be in that everybody loved as well. That was another one that had big windows and were wide open, and they would play music in the background, and it was a lot of fun. So that's what's on the horizon.
And Ben, if you had a talk that was a great talk and it didn't make it, is just space issues, and please submit again, because we'll have some more slots next year.
Yeah, and promoting TRIS. TRIS is coming up, and they are still doing call for speakers. So if it's still open by the time this rolls out, you should do that. What was the thing that you were saying we should? You brought up that we should address the tickets.
Oh, earlier, yes.
People had waited, and it was almost like last minute. So we have to get the T-shirts and a lot of the signage and a lot of the food orders in almost 30 days before the event.
Right.
So that's like early June. And we were early June, about 500 tickets sold.
Say 500 or 600.
Of the 1,000. And it was only in the last couple weeks that happened. So watch out for this. One of the things we're going to do is have an increasing scale of price as we get closer to the event.
More front end that
because we
than
want to
that.
get as many people signed up, legit, who are going to show up early. Now, don't buy a ticket to hold it and then don't show up, because nobody likes no-shows.
Right.
But we know what happens. The other thing we're going to do is open up sponsorships a lot earlier as well. And I believe we're going to have some discounts for some sponsors.
Yeah, early birds.
If they are able to get their funds to us.
Okay.
This calendar year, probably by October-ish or so. And if we have that money, you'll be able to take advantage of a great sponsor slot, and at a discounted price.
Yeah. And we'll be able to do a bunch of cool stuff with it because we'll know earlier it's there.
Yep.
Awesome.
Cool.
Next topic.
Let's do it. What are we talking about?
So one of the things I thought was cool in the news, Know Before. They came
sure.
out.
No,
with,
wait, first,
No, what?
is this really Justin?
What?
Is
Because
this
of the
really
news?
you?
Oh, right.
No, just kidding. Sorry to interrupt you.
They hired essentially an employee, did the interview, did the background checks, all that stuff and everything. And surprise, surprise, came out to be a North Korean spy and everything. So it was really interesting. I actually thought for a second, I was like, why would they want to be in Know Before? Is that really a hot level target? I mean, they're in a lot of businesses.
Yep.
But they're, other than some employee information and not even PII typically, it's, email and name. What are you going to get out of that?
I can see you.
Could be a launching platform maybe because everybody has to go there. So if they were able to get malware to the portal,
delivering bad stuff through
Yeah.
phishing tests would actually be pretty nasty.
Uh-huh.
That would be pretty rough. Maybe that's the integrity attack. It's a human integrity attack.
Everybody whitelist Know Before.
Right.
Emails going through.
It really could be.
So,
It really could be something like that.
So when a person interviewed, did they do a video interview, and were they using like some sort of AI
so.
in order to mask their appearance?
No. I think they were doing a video. I'd have to double check, but I think they were doing a video. But then when they presented ID, the ID was fake, but it looked enough like the person.
Yeah, close enough. Waving through.
Yeah. So it was enough that it went through. Looking at that is what when I read it, what I understood. But I thought it was interesting. You read, basically the CEO came out, and I thought that was good, what you pointed out. I'll let you point out and everything. So
Set me up, and that's perfect. So the CEO wrote a blog, released it on did an FAQ and then wrote a follow-up blog.
Yeah.
The FAQ came out on July 25th, and the blog came out on the 27th. And basically, people were saying, well, you were breached. And he's like, no, we weren't breached. It wasn't a data breach. It was, in fact, they didn't even need to bring this out into the open. And so as I was reading this, I was thinking, man, kind of really sucks to be Know Before right now. And then after I was reading it, I'm like, wow, that's a lot of good integrity that he's showing.
Yeah.
And it's because he said he wanted to explain what happened, because if it could happen to them with all of their security controls and all of their processes being a security company, just think of all the companies this could easily happen to.
Absolutely.
And what do we know right now? Do we know how many companies this has happened to? We'll never have an idea. It's probably happened, right?
Oh,
and honestly, the brilliance, I don't know the CEO, but the brilliance of, this is free publicity.
Right.
At this
He's
point,
yeah.
wow, yeah. If you're,
You know,
if you're
now-
already in the news, you own the
we wouldn't have talked about him
cycle.
today,
Yeah.
else this thing coming out.
Right.
So,
Yeah. He said egg on his face, and they had egg on their face,
good
but
ownership.
here's what they did. What were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, to the point about how many companies has this happened to, is this happening to? I know both in my prior experience and my wife's prior experience, there are, it's actually similar things, definitely not the same thing, but similar things are not uncommon in certain hiring practices. And so, she had a couple experiences where the developer that interviewed, who happened to be having, video issues at the time and all sorts of things, and got hired right through the process, was not the developer, clearly based on skill sets and a difference in vocal tones and accent and things like that interviewed. And so I think operationally, it happens and can happen, and it happens. But from a nation state perspective, that's pretty terrifying, because I think the low tech things that are gonna find someone out, right, when they don't have the skills, stuff like that. The nation state doesn't necessarily need to suffer from those, right? The long con, you can work a while at making someone look like they should fit in and have the skill set and all that stuff. So. It's pretty wild.
And I had something, so I actually have a developer starting tomorrow, but going through the interview process, there was one interviewee that I had. I could definitely tell he was reading from some AI generated answers. Like I asked him about this question.
Your answer has 3 distinct sections,
he was going
each with
very
4
simple.
bullets.
Like I was hiring for a senior position for this, and he was like, "Yes, and you can turn the widget green or blue." And I'm like, "What? Like,
why is that a relevant detail? What do you mean?
And you can use GitHub for a source code repository." It's like,
did it start out with, in this ever-changing environment, because every AI-generated article starts with that.
Yeah. But yeah, it was so like 101 that you could tell like it was something AI generated, you know.
So is that the guy starting tomorrow?
Yeah, no. He didn't get the job.
I know I mentioned this to you before. I don't know if I mentioned it on the podcast, but I have a buddy who they started calling their junior security person ChatGPT behind his back because it became extremely apparent that that's where he was sourcing all of his information, and so if they had a security question, they'd be like, just ask ChatGPT, and they're like, wait, the person or the site? But yeah, it's an interesting take on the same issue in terms of the source of the information is not the perceived source of the information.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some good takeaways, and I respect what KnowBe4 called out here, and I like some of the controls that they put in their write-up. So if you get a chance, go find the KnowBe4 blog, take a read on it. But just some highlights here. I took some notes on that they do. So they shipped out a PC. And it went somewhere, and somebody got it, and the way it was being used set off some alarms, and that's how they kind of discovered stuff.
Did I hear it was remoting in from North Korea or no?
Yeah, what I heard was they took it and put it in some place in the U.S., I believe, that has like almost like a farm for putting machines like this, and then somebody's got a hands-on stuff so they could remote to it and get access.
Gotcha.
I didn't get the details of how that works. But what KnowBe4 did was they didn't put any sensitive information on the machine, and it's almost as if a new machine that's clean was sent with no data.
Yeah.
And the only thing they could do.
That's typical process from a company like.
I've seen it in multiple ways. I saw, you get apps loaded, you get things loaded in advance that gives you access into further than maybe you did.
Yeah, if
this
it's like
was
fully
pretty clean.
drop shipped, depending on the service you buy and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then
but data isn't technically loaded on the PC. Yeah.
No, but access can
to
be
service,
preloaded to. Yeah.
So if they drop like full wiki access to all of your stuff, that's
right.
That's
Or even
no
like,
problem.
hey, your privilege groups associate you with the finance department. Okay, here's access to the finance department share drive, and by the way, here's the link to that right out of the gate.
So that brings up the second thing they did a good job at is they limited the access only to something somebody needs in order to continue to go in through onboarding. They had no other privs.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So they were locked down for no other privs
good.
on the access control. So when they log in, they still had very rudimentary access.
I have seen, you said that's unique. I've seen similar things before, but they're often tied to like, hey, you're not allowed to access X until you get training on Y. And there's a compliance reason for that. But this is actually an example of like that working well for all the right reasons.
Oh, yeah. And then the third thing they did or will do in the future, and they're fixing their own process, they said, is for new employee workstations, they're going to drop them to a UPS shop that requires a photo ID as you come to pick the machine up. So it's going to help them. It's another control that's going to help validate that the person who's picking it up has an ID that matches the name of the person who's supposed to pick it up.
I do think that's good.
Help.
But
they got fooled by the ID already. So I guess where that actual physical ID is.
UPS, you look at this instead of me.
Yeah.
So I think it's good. I don't think it's bad at all. But
I don't think
retail level identity checks, I'm certainly not suggesting it's bad. I don't know that it's foolproof. So, but from a defense in depth perspective,
Yeah,
they
another
validate the ID on the onboarding process, So it really, it's good.
They validated the ID against the video they had seen,
right?
Which may or may not match. But when you walk up in real life and you have an ID, that's a little bit harder to.
I don't know, man. I used to have long hair and a ponytail, and I don't anymore. And no facial hair. But
anyway,
not foolproof.
And it's lower level employee. Not to say UPS people are lower level employees, but it's somebody working a counter, checking ID. So would they check it if it went through one place? Would they catch it in another?
Yeah, I'd be very interested in if UPS has an actual formal process for that they.
I mentioned before retail ID checking, but actually now that I think about a little more who UPS is and the fact that they get tons of parcels each and every day, many of them would require ID authenticated stuff because it's not just laptops, right?
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
I don't know.
Well, the difference here is
I
that
get a lot
instead
of
of-
alcohol to my house,
Huh?
and the UPS driver's like, "Can I just say I dropped it off?" I'm like, "Yeah."
But that's different than the retail location, though, right?
Huh?
But that's different than like having to go to the retail location.
Well, yeah, but he drops them at my house. He's like, "Can I just?"
Yeah, and if you're the UPS driver's boss watching this, it never happened.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah, you're never getting anything again, man. It's over.
yeah, you better enjoy that. So
I live in Wisconsin. It's
yeah,
Don't
and I
even
use
get us started.
FedEx for all
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah.
Don't even get us started on these unsecured lights.
yeah, right.
Anyway,
But the main thing is that instead of just shipping it to somebody's house and
Right.
having the UPS guy leave a laptop on their front porch, this is a little bit harder.
and I do think it is because I think the delivery driving thing has become such a commoditized service. That's a lot more of a gig economy thing, whereas the retail worker in the store, whose job it is to authenticate people and give them their stuff, I could see there being a different and better process at the retail. I'm not
know.
saying it's foolproof.
There's a lot of peer pressure. Like, are those employees prepared to say no? Type of thing. Like, typically they're junior employees. Like, it has to be very clear. If it's questionable, they're going to let it pass.
I think I'm convincing myself that
don't
it's
know.
likely better than I initially thought it was. I'm certainly not saying it's foolproof.
yeah.
But yeah. But I think
It's control that can't hurt.
Right.
Like, if you're a legit person, it's going to fly through. Like, you have the ID, everything's going to go through.
Hey, if you work at UPS and you have details in these controls,
Yell at Justin.
post it, comment.
I don't want to invite him to my house, and then they'll know where I live.
No, not to your
They
house.
already do. They deliver the alcohol. No, but
Comment
but
on
post
the
a comment. Yeah,
comment
yeah.
on the podcast.
Yeah.
Let us know.
absolutely.
Yeah, it'd be good to hear. But I do think those are great. Those are good added controls to try and stem similar things from happening in the future.
Yeah.
And it sounds like some things went really right. I mean, obviously they found the thing before it got worse.
Right, and one of the things that they detected was that the guy was trying to load InfoStealer software on that endpoint in order to see what they could pull,
Right.
and there was nothing there to pull, so it didn't go anywhere. But it set off alarms. So big takeaways.
So that's probably the biggest thing.
Yeah,
Because, I'm thinking about this, like, let's just eliminate that, it was kind of a laptop sent to a farm and all that stuff and everything.
Yeah.
What if the person was just a spy trying to infiltrate a company, but acted as his own agent, like he has the ID, he has all that. If he gets past
Right.
onboarding,
This is a burner identity.
or he has his real identity, or whatever
That's
it
what I'm
is,
saying. It's
yeah.
real for the nation
Yeah,
you're in.
exactly. Yeah, so it matches everything, and you hire the person. He was able to fake his way through the onboarding, or the interview process. That's going to be a lot harder. I think the detection on monitoring what they're doing, and
sure.
And I love the idea.
and
not,
any insider threat, really, right?
yeah,
Profile.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think and also I really like the limiting the access until they're kind of slowly onboarded.
Right.
Because once you start interacting with them, usually people want to get in and out, as fast as they can. They're not.
Oh, I
Gonna,
have to take all these trainings
Yeah,
before I can
exactly.
steal all the data.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, so, I mean, most criminals are like, I want to be done with this, type of thing. So the fastest way in and out, with it.
Yeah, I agree with that in general. If this was truly like a sent by a nation state, they're probably going to have a little more patience than your typical. But I think all the controls are good, and it's just like it's anything else. Like we go to B-Sides and we go to the lockpick village, right? And you learn pretty quickly, like, well, most locks are great, but they kind of keep the honest people honest, oftentimes.
Yeah.
And so you set up layers of
Sure.
physical security, and
Right.
locks are one of those layers, or it's multiple types of locks, and because you delay, you frustrate, and you set up additional instances where they're either going to get frustrated and give up, or you're going to notice that they're doing something weird.
Right, and that's the key. So a lock's purpose is to deter all the uninterested,
Yep.
to take the person who's breaking in and make it as hard as possible so it takes as long as possible.
Right.
Meanwhile, what should be happening at the same time is some camera is picking that up,
Yeah.
motion's going off, somebody's monitoring that, and the difficulty to pick the lock needs to be aligned with the amount of time it takes for your local police to actually be able to get there once you call them.
Right.
And then now you can have a response process before they get to the next layer. And that's the same thing
It's
for your
exact
network.
same. Exactly.
We use it, I used to work at Diebold. One of the tests we had, we used to run a whole bunch of different tests, including certain explosive, is how fast you can get in the cash box in the ATM with blowtorches, with, all this stuff and everything. Like, how fast can you get at the cash, was the ultimate goal with this. And it was essentially minutes in every single test, type of thing. But those minutes, hopefully you have alarms already going off and police responding,
Right.
Into that. And that was the whole goal, was to, and usually there's limited cash. Like the most cash boxes are casinos, and they
Yeah.
have like 30, 40, 50K in that cash. But
Yeah,
most
yeah,
are
yeah.
like 5K, 3K, 2K, whatever it is,
But I also love the analogy because I think from a digital perspective, there are all these defenders and blue teamers and stuff like that. And the same thing applies. Like, how fast can I get to the cache? Well, how much C4 do I have?
Yeah.
Okay, but I'm probably going to get noticed. So the really, really fast mechanisms right in,
Yeah.
loud, noisy, going to get detected. Maybe if you have a great escape plan, you'll walk away with whatever's in there. You might even destroy some stuff in the process. I mean, the digital equivalent exists, right? Like there are some attacks that are really noisy, you're going to get detected, but it might be faster.
There was this one attack that was going around, and never really caught on. But if you poured gas down the front of the ATM and it filled up so much, with that, too much and it exploded the whole thing. Too little and it didn't open up the safe, but the right amount would actually blow open the safe and everything. So, it was interesting seeing some of the cases.
There you go. There's your tip. So if we start seeing that,
I was just going to say, banks and UPS hate this podcast.
Yeah, right.
So, but we got off track from
Yes,
the
right.
the
No,
hiring
before-
process.
oh.
So the things to think about, and we need a whiteboard here for next time.
It's over there, but not
process
on
flow.
camera.
What's that?
It's over there, but not on
Oh yeah,
camera.
yeah, exactly. Process flow. Your hiring. Go through and document your hiring process. Whiteboard it out and look at each step and see at what point you give people enough access. And by then, would you have time to have detected this problem yourself?
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing that's interesting is even if it's not insider threat, right? Like compromised credentials is a thing, right? Bad people using legitimate access, right? So even if it wasn't like, hey, this was a different person than who you thought it was, maybe it's just a different person using a legitimate account that has gone through the training and has been an employee for years and all that stuff, but now it's compromised. And I think a lot of the same controls apply in terms of the defense in depth and are they doing something weird and is there least privilege and why are they doing this thing today that's out of normal behavior? And we should talk about that and look at it and think about it a little bit. So
Makes sense.
yeah.
All right. So we got just a little bit more time for one more topic here.
Yeah, what are we talking about?
So, did you read this? No, you did not. Okay. So one of the articles that came out, and actually, do you have it in front of you? The article. Why don't you cover this one here? I don't have it right in
Well,
front of me.
real high. It's CISO scapegoats, and the article's point was how are CISOs being potentially the scapegoat of these various problems. So you have the new SEC cyber risk disclosure rule.
Yep. And we'll have all these links what we talked about today in the show notes. So definitely check it out. You can read it for yourself here. But what I thought, so we talked a little bit before the podcast, and I thought it was interesting. I mean, CISOs are often looked at, if the security is not good, it's your fault. And oftentimes they get blamed for, if you have a breach, what was your CISO doing, type of thing. And it happens all the time, even with
That's true.
the change. Change Healthcare United.
Yeah.
I was hearing in Congress, they were basically blaming the CISO, like you didn't have a security background and all that stuff and everything. And
Yeah.
I don't know the CISO from a hole in the wall, but they go into the CISO, wasn't qualified, with that. No matter what the issues or the facts or anything like that, that wasn't apparent or clear at that time. But some senator or congressman was going on like, hey, CISO, like, why weren't things bad? And it's interesting to me because as a CISO, as if you're following the traditional 3 layers of oversight, you shouldn't have much operational in charge. You're there as an oversight facility. You're seeing if the first level controls are operating effectively or not, type of thing. Unless there's a failure reporting, like what if you said everything is crap right now? You need to fix all this stuff. How is that their fault?
Yeah, no, and one of the things that came out of this article is the dismissal of the SEC charges against SolarWinds.
Right.
Came out of it. But I don't think that they really
He was named
said,
in the lawsuit.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to me.
And it's unclear to me whether or not he is totally out of the water with this, but
they cleared some charges onto it. Yeah. With that, there were some that were dismissed, as without standing.
It's interesting. There's not a lot of precedent yet, so I think like all the case law is kind of systems feeling its way through some of these things. But it seems to me that you were talking about the 3 layers of defense, right?
Yeah.
The Department of Transportation makes the rules of the road. Are they responsible when someone doesn't follow the rules of the road? Right? It's not terribly different than that. Right? There are people that make the rules, people that enforce the rules, people that follow and or break the rules. And I mean, I don't know. I just keep coming back to the concept of like adversarial attribution is hard, right? Well, attribution of like who did the bad thing is also difficult or murky sometimes, right? Because it absolutely could be a case where, a house falls down. Why did it fall down? Well, the architect designed it poorly. Maybe, right? Or the builder built it poorly. Maybe. Or, well, you ran a bulldozer into the wall that's like a structural supporting thing. Maybe.
Well, and it was crazy. Like, was it Experian or Expedient that had that big breach and everything?
Yeah.
And I remember the CEO get on, and he's like, "It was a struts vulnerability, in one of their like, exposed websites." And they're like, "Oh yeah, the admin didn't patch it." The CEO get up there, and it's like the admin didn't patch it. It's like the admin didn't patch it. That's your reason.
But the point there, that was the problem. Is it was known, it was on a list, and it was deprioritized, and it
someone made that decision.
Somebody made a decision,
right? It was, and how they made the decision matters, right? In so many ways, because there's a lot bad stuff happens all the time that like you can't account. Again, we talked about the act of God in terms of like bad stuff happening earlier. Like sometimes bad stuff happens, and everyone did all the reasonable precautions. Sometimes bad stuff happens because someone was clearly negligent. And drawing the line between those things, I mean, it's definitely a combo of art and science. But I think all this is wrapped up in where are those lines drawn? And your point about the 3 layers as well. Like, how do you attribute why the house fell down, right? And when that happens, well, with the CISO, there's a chief title there, right? That's typically a decent layer of authority. Saying the admin didn't patch it, that might be true, but okay, well, is the admin personally accountable for this thing?
Right.
Or do you need to make the CISO or some oversight function, regardless, CEO, whoever it is, risk management, whatever, responsible for evaluating and addressing it, right? Because it's weird to me to hear, oh, I blame the admin, right, wrong, or indifferent, because like that's probably not an executive level.
Well, the
position.
admin's not deciding what's patching and what's not. Like typically that's not authority.
But they can fail a process that's been defined.
They can, absolutely.
They don't decide whether or not it should be patched.
However, there should be, again, the layer of security oversight. There should be oversight. So detecting whether that patch has made it or not is absolutely in security's oversight,
right.
Type of thing.
So are we saying that the CISO scapegoat thing is overblown?
Yeah,
Because-
absolutely.
Yeah, all right, I agree.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, I'm of the kind of premise everything boils up to the CEO, at that point. Like at any level that there's a failure, it comes down to whatever it is, a prioritization, an oversight, and it comes down to he's the chief executive officer. So even if it's a fail of the CEO or a CISO at that point, then maybe he didn't have enough interaction to bubble up that stuff. Maybe the process was failing to get
Yeah.
the appropriate resources there. Like there's a failure somewhere, but at the end of the day, it comes to the top, on they didn't execute appropriately. Again, you just have to own it. Maybe you didn't do anything wrong, at that.
Yeah,
but
sometimes
there's a
bad stuff
failure.
happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Or sometimes you were a cause of bad stuff. Yeah.
You let somebody take too much ownership that didn't have a good judgment. And
That's what I was going to say. Like trust flows down from the top,
Right.
Yeah, so getting into a slightly different perspective.
Yeah.
What does this mean? What I'm seeing in the industry is lots of CISOs who aren't in their job anymore and aren't actually interested in going out and getting another CISO job. They are liking the idea of a VCISO job, working in that perspective because it's a different layer of accountability. They don't have that main layer. So I'm seeing that. And what's happening now is that when companies are hiring the CISOs, they may not be getting the best of the selection because
the people that have been through it are
people are going to be through it. They're no longer interested in wanting to do it.
Right.
And so one of the things I do when I jump on a call with a director of security or a CISO, and I think I might have mentioned this before on another episode, is I ask the question, let's start here. What keeps you from getting fired? And let's reverse engineer through that. How do we create an assurance program where you're in a position to demonstrate that you have defensibility of your actions, that you're pointing out when there's a nonconformity of a process, that you have a corrective action process that really goes do the 5 whys of a root cause analysis and figure out what the problem was. And if you stop with it being a person's fault, you're not going far enough. In fact, that's a tenet of an ISO 27001 implementation. You can't blame a person for nonconformity. They might have a part in it. And sure, maybe they're not doing their job well and you have to deal with that. But you need to go all the way down and look at the processes and see what failed in the process mechanism.
And to that, you have corrective action to, address the problem. If it is a person or a process, into that.
I don't think I heard that. I don't think I had heard that before, but I love the question, like what keeps you from getting fired? Because it's such a great way of...
See, I disagree with it.
I love it.
I took issue.
Oh, see, here's why. I'll start with why I love it.
Okay.
I love it because it comes at a risk tolerance question from a sideways point of view. Like, because you can ask people like, what's the organizational risk tolerance? And they'll be like, oh, maybe they kind of know, but oftentimes they're like, I don't even know what we're talking about. And even if they're like steeped in that, they're like, well, what do you mean by it? I'll tell you what I mean. And it's this whole thing. But if you're like, well, what keeps you from getting fired? It's like, okay, well, what would your boss be super pissed about?
Right. What
that's
would
risk
cause
tolerance.
that problem?
Yeah, that's risk tolerance.
Have you read the book Extreme Ownership?
Yeah.
And extreme ownership is everything that you could possibly do to make sure this isn't a problem.
Yeah.
So if somebody gets on and I would ask them that question and then ask them your question, which is, if I said first, what gets you fired? And instead I would lead into the point of, well, what's your risk tolerance level? What are your thresholds? And if they don't know, I'd say, well, the first thing you do is take extreme ownership of that. You need to understand what that is. You need to understand who's going to hold you accountable.
And for what?
They're probably already holding you accountable. You just haven't had that conversation yet.
Right.
Have that conversation.
It's all about expectations.
Yeah.
And how the trust flows. So that's why I love that though, because it approaches that question in a very direct, straightforward, tactical way that's going to get you all the answers you need to get to the other places. So anyway, that's why I like it.
So
but you didn't like it.
Didn't like the way I framed that. Tell me why.
Yeah, so I look at it as the getting fired as the low bar of expectations. So you're attacking at what I need to deliver, and here's the low bar.
So you want to say like what's going to get you promoted?
Yeah, I want to say like what's going to add the most value, you know, into that.
Maybe that was his next question.
Yeah.
You gotta. I always start with how do we make sure that the worst case scenario for you, the person I'm talking to right now,
and that could be
it could be addressed.
Because I think,
and it's a starting point.
yeah, when I think of the fired, like I think of Office Space is like, you know, you just have to work, you know, just enough not to get fired.
Do you really want to be the person that only wears 4 pieces of flair?
Yeah, no, maybe I need to reframe that. That's good feedback. I'll reframe that question a little bit. And it's what is your boss expecting of you?
I like that.
But it's easier it's more fun to just start with.
Yeah, when you get fired. And I get it. And, you know, we're probably more aligned than different in that.
Oh, yeah.
But I hear like, what's going to get you fired? That's the bare min, you know, type of thing. And so a lot of employees, you know, not good employees will say, what's going to get me fired? And I'll work right here. You know, like,
that's fair. My not exactly the same, but my kind of version of that like sideways question that I'll ask in a lot of risk assessment stuff is like, what's your worst Friday afternoon ever look like?
Right.
Like, what's the absolute worst stuff that could? Yeah, right. I have to touch every single endpoint before over the weekend.
I had a call with a client at 9:30 in the morning on Friday, and one of the guys from the security office, he's like, "I've been on the call since midnight last night." You know, type of thing. I was like, then why are you on the phone with me? We're talking PCI. Like, this isn't a priority right now. Hey, you dropped off.
I will say, if I had to pull a silver lining out of that event, though, it would be testing the responsiveness of, like, a live fire test of how aware, responsive, and coordinated a lot of these response teams are. Because there are a ton of unsung heroes that made a lot of stuff happen really, really quickly.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think it really, those events, you never want them to happen, but you know, it's like never let a good crisis go to waste.
Right.
And I think part of that for this one is recognizing the people that really knocked it out of the park to get stuff back in order versus the people that like maybe didn't jump on the horse quite as quickly as they could.
Right. Hey, I poured you a drink
I appreciate
for a
that.
reason here, and it's because I think we need to cheers to those IT people who went well above and beyond.
Yeah.
And it looks like we came full circle with this conversation. We started with
absolutely.
CrowdStrike and we're ending with it. And
Yeah.
hey, here's to
Joe,
everybody.
you want to lead us out here?
Yeah, here's to everybody that did a superhero effort over the last week in order to get your companies back up and running. So cheers to you.
Whether people know it or not.
To everybody. So I think this is a wrap. We had a good episode here.
Loved it.
So,
That's it.
all right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for episode 3. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, get the word out, you know, of this podcast here. We're going to potentially have a surprise for episode 4. I'm not going to mention it because we don't have anything planned right now, but we're talking about it. So stay tuned for that. It will be a good one. And please join us again. Thanks, all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.